Tom Adler, and I'm here at the Art Museum of Greater Lafayette with Al Pounders, a painter who lives and works in West Lafayette, who has works in our permanent collection. Thanks for joining me today. Could you tell us a little bit about your background, maybe some of the things that affected your decision to become an artist?
Well, I was always some kind of artist. When I was a kid in school, I was a class artist. I did a lot of the stuff that the class wanted me to do, and I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and went to a high school that had an art program, and I also had scholarships to the Albright Art School in Buffalo, which I needed. We were very poor, and managed to get through that for 3 years. And making art has always been something I wanted to do. I decided at the age of 24 that I just stood there and said, okay, I'm going to be a painter. Among all the things I could have done, I could have been a designer because I studied graphic design when I was in art school. And from there, it just went on. I was blessed with great teachers at the Albright Art School. At Cornell, where I did my MFA, I had some very good people who were mentors to me. I liked it very much, and been painting ever since.
In our permanent collection, we have 4 of your works. We have one of your large circle paintings, White Dress with Mole Skulls, and then we have 3 prints of clothing. We have the Hoosier band jacket, and we have Japanese Fantasy, and we have Dress with Birds and Flowers.
We also have that big still life I did, which is 6 feet square. How did you miss that?
The still life with the French flag? Yes. I was going to separate that out from the others, though, because it's so different.
Oh, well.
But anyway, could you tell us a little about the impetus for the paintings that focus on clothing?
Yeah, well, it started with a series of drawings I did of clothing when I was sitting in my studio, and also at the same time I stretched up a large group of circles because I was tired of rectangles. I just thought, I'll do something else. I thought maybe I'd do coins or something. I didn't know what I was going to do with those circles, but I put the 2 things together, and they seemed to work very well because of the curvilinear quality of that clothing can take, and it worked with the circle, and that was nice. And it just went on and added things to that, and to just the clothing things with art history parts, and also anti-war things that I was doing during the late 60s and early 70s, and all of those things seemed to fit very well into the circle. And I did that for 13 years.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the still life we have, still life with the French flag.
Right.
Have you done a lot of still lifes? Or?
Oh, yes. When I was in graduate school, I did my thesis on still life painting. Not only a painted thesis, but a written thesis. And and I did that for several years after I left graduate school. And then I dropped it and was on to other things. I've done many different kinds of things, especially during the 7 or 8 years after graduate school. And then landscapes have always been part of what I do. Excuse me. And it didn't become a permanent subject matter for me until I had gone to Italy on my sabbatical with Lauren, my wife, and started painting that wonderful place. I had to just do that because this was ideal. The combination of the farmers working the fields right up to the top of the mountains and nature together. It worked visually so beautifully for me. Although I know those guys didn't plant that stuff for me to paint. It just was something that I sought out. We took many trips up and down the hills looking for places for me to work all those years. 25 years of it, I think.
I mean, the landscapes are really notable for your use of bold color and so forth. Is that an influence from some other artists? Or?
Oh, sure. I've always been interested in the modernists, the French painters in particular, and when I looked out at the landscape and I saw all that green, I said, well, I'm not going to paint it green. And I push it in other directions for the emotional quality I felt about the place. And so the color is an emotional thing rather than a descriptive thing.
Could you say a little bit in closing about what you hope to achieve through your painting, what you feel you've accomplished in your career, your long career as an artist?
Well, I've had many influences from the great artists of the past, going all the way back to the Renaissance, although there's nothing Renaissance about my work, I don't think. But painting is a unique activity, and it stems, in my case, from being influenced by such artists as Matisse, for example, whose writings I read avidly because he really nailed it. He really told me, and all of us, what painting really should be for our time. And it's important to be involved in our time, but I'm also interested in being part of all time in painting. I'm interested in tradition very much, and so I think that's reflected in my work. But he told us that you don't put apples in paintings for eating, and Cézanne said pretty much the same thing, they're for looking at. And if that's the case, you've got to deal with how you feel when you're looking at that stuff. And so that opens up interpretation. It opens up all kinds of things. And I almost never work from my memory or from my imagination completely. I always have to have something in front of me that tells me, this is what you should be experiencing. This is what you ought to be reacting to.
Well, thanks very much for helping us document the works that are in our permanent collection.